I spent a day in the Peak District photographing mushrooms and took some of my best photos so far. Right at the beginning of my walk, I found this tiny white mushroom growing in some leaf litter. So I set up my camera really low to the ground, making sure that the background was nice and dark to create a contrast to make the mushroom stand out. And while photographing that first find, I noticed that there were a few smaller white mushrooms to the side here as well. They were a little bit difficult to photograph with where they were, and there was no way of moving them, but I eventually got a photo that I was at least somewhat pleased with. I then came across this large holly tree with a lot of leaves on the ground, and so I decided to search the leaves here for a while in the hopes of finding a specific species that I really wanted to photograph. And after some time, I finally found one. This is a holly parachute. It's a really unique mushroom as it forms these spikes all along the cap. So I placed it low to the ground with a dark backdrop at first and photographed it the same as the earlier finds. And then placed a yellow leaf in the background to try and create more contrast, as the spines were way too dark to show against the black backdrop initially, and I was really pleased with how this turned out. Keeping the yellow backdrop of the leaf, I then moved the camera further back to take a photo of the whole mushroom from stem to cap instead of just a close-up. Moving on from that find, I came across another small white mushroom growing in some moss here. I attempted to photograph the smaller one to the side as well, but unfortunately this photo didn't turn out too well. But while taking that photo, I did notice this quite unique small fungi growing in this mud here, right to the side of it. This was hard to photograph with where it was, as the height was awkward to get to with my tripod, but I eventually got something. Moving on to a larger find, there was these 3 ink caps growing at the base of a tree, and so I used my wide angle lens to try and capture some of the background scenery of the trees and water that you can see here. And while doing that, I'd spotted that there was quite a few mushrooms growing on this branch over in the water. It was a tricky scene to photograph, and I didn't get anything that was really that good, but I'll still share them as they're interesting and it's nice to see. And going back to where those previous mushrooms were, I looked again at the roots of this tree and found a few more of different species once again, and I decided to single out this one as it had the contrast of colours on the top and stem, which was more unique than most of the others here. I eventually decided I was done with that location, and so I moved my walk further along the river in the hopes of finding some more interesting things. And it wasn't long before I found this quite unique mushroom growing on this old piece of grass. I've seen this quite a lot growing on pieces of wood, but it's the first time seeing it on something as fragile as a blade of grass. So I gently balanced it using the leg of my tripod to hold the grass in place, and took a photo of it that I was quite pleased with. A short while further on my walk, I came across this patch here that I knew would have a few mushrooms growing in the leaf litter underneath these bushes, and it wasn't long before I noticed these 2 here that were really perfect with how they were framed together. I didn't have to change anything in the scene here, they just made for a nice photo as they were, with the one even having a perfect droplet of water on the top of it. A short walk further down the footpath, I came across these yellow stag's horn fungi growing on these old tree stumps. I singled out this one down here as it was a lot more photogenic than the rest, as the others looked a little bit too old and expired, and I was pretty pleased with how it turned out, even though it was very awkward to get to. As you can tell by the video here, I had to climb up a bit of a steep bank. Moving on, I came to this large pile of branches and wood here in the hopes of finding some more species, and it wasn't long before I noticed this large cluster here. I decided to single out these two on the left, as I felt they made for a nice photo on their own and were a bit less cluttered and messy than the larger group, and I was really pleased with how these looked, with the water on the cap adding a nice glare of reflection to the top. I also then moved my camera further back, as there was another species to the side that I wanted to get in frame, and following that I also took a close-up photo of the species on the left on its own. Next to that pile of wood, I found a few more of these beech leaf bonnets, and I decided that these two at the front with the really small one in the middle would make for a really nice photo. And so I placed them on a slightly raised part of the footpath to make it easier to photograph, set up my camera, and first photographed the group as you can see here, and then singled out the cap of the mushroom on the right with the water droplet. Continuing my walk back along the river again now, in the hopes of finding some more unique scenes in the damp, mossy habitats that were around here. It wasn't long before I noticed on this tree quite a lot of tiny white mycena mushrooms growing in the moss. After looking for a while, I spotted this one, which I felt was the most photogenic of the group, and using my taller tripod I was able to set the camera up to get a frame that I was pretty pleased with, keeping the angle slightly lower looking up so that you could see some of the underside of the mushroom. On another mossy tree a bit further on, I found another small white mushroom, but this time using the backdrop of the leaves as well, I got more colour, which made for a bit of a different photo. Searching a few more trees along the river, and I came across these, which were probably the smallest of the entire day for species that I photographed. I first took this photo here. And then decided to change the angle up and get a really low angle looking up to see some more of the detail of the underside, as I wasn't too pleased with how it looked in that first photo. And on the same tree, found these two really tiny ones side by side and took another very similar angle looking up from below. After those two, I decided I was done with this area alongside the river and decided to head back, ready for the next location. And during my walk back, I found this tree that was absolutely covered in these small white mushrooms, similar to the ones earlier, except here I noticed that they were growing all the way up to the top of the tree, which is something I very rarely see. I didn't photograph any of these, mainly as most of them were way too high to reach, but it's still nice to show. And I then found this small white mushroom growing in the mossy embankment on the side of the footpath, which was quite easy to photograph, unlike most of the others, and I really liked the dark backdrop on this one too. I then returned to where I'd found those holly parachutes earlier, determined to find more, and I'm very glad I did, as I found these two, which turned out to be some of the best photos I've ever taken. I first decided to photograph this more straight, larger one on the left, so I balanced it on a raised piece of wood to allow me to get the angle that I wanted, and started with just the green backdrop of the leaves. Before using the same trick as earlier, using another yellow leaf as the backdrop to create more contrast against the detail of the mushroom. And then moving the camera in closer to take a photo, focused purely on the cap with that large water droplet sitting on top. I then moved to the other mushroom on the right here. Where it was made it harder to get a nice backdrop, so it began with quite a dark backdrop. And with that dark backdrop I moved closer in and then changed angle and used the leaf as a yellow backdrop once again. And these two photos here turned out to be my favourites of this whole walk. There were so many small droplets all over the cap and spines of this mushroom. Towards the end of the day, as the sun was setting, I moved to this reservoir location to have a search through the small woodlands and fields surrounding it. I first found this mushroom here, just under a fence that was a little bit tricky to get to, but as I had the 2x teleconverter still attached from earlier, I was able to get the photo without having to put the camera too far under the fence. I then found this group of 3 mushrooms here, which I framed with the sun setting in the background to create a really nice orange glow in the backdrop, as well as the backlit mushrooms, which I thought turned out really nice. And while doing that, also noticed this small white mushroom growing on a small stick here, which I gently placed within some of this rotting wood just to hold it in a raised area to photograph easier. To the side of me while photographing those, I'd noticed a few of these large mushrooms growing on these trees. I didn't photograph them my usual way, but I did take a couple of high-res shots using the 12 to 100mm lens that was on my other camera. Especially this one here with the sun hitting it at the top, I thought turned out really nice. And it's something a bit different to the scenes I'd been photographing throughout the day. And my final, very brief stop of the day, I moved to these fields just to the side of that woodlands in the hopes of finding a couple of different species. Unfortunately, it wasn't too successful, and the only find was these 2 mushrooms here, but they still made for a nice photo, so it wasn't all bad. And so that is all the photos from this walk. I would say it's one of my most successful yet, and if you like this video, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe and stick around for the next one.